Hey guys, it's Rachel. It's Thankful Thursday. I'm on my own again, I'm afraid, but I do have a co-host. It's just seems to be taking a bit of time for some reason. She's very new to YouTube, and I just think she needs to get herself sorted a little bit with all of that. I'm doing my bit for comic relief. Look, notice the Madonna t-shirt. How cute is that? And I'm actually at my friend Amanda's house, and she tried to put lipstick, like red lipstick on me, because I was going to do my, red lipstick, red nose thing, but I really didn't like myself in the lipstick because it kind of made my face like... Anyway, this week I want to address an issue concerning self-injury and eating disorders. A few people have actually asked some questions about this, and there was one on the feedback video last week, and a couple of my friends have asked a few questions, including Amanda, who I'm staying with right now, and I think it's like a really important issue to address, because I think there's a huge amount of people who have eating disorders who self-harm, and that's certainly something that I've come across, and yeah, I do think it's quite an important topic. I'm going to try and keep this to one video, but what I might do is continue it actually if we get feedback on the Sunday and people want to ask a few more questions. I have thought about how to answer this, and I guess the only way really I'm going to be able to provide any sort of advice is to talk about my own circumstances. Of course, each person's experience is different, but for me, I actually had anorexia for over 2 years before I started self-harming, and the self-harming kind of came at a point when I wasn't coping, and when the anorexia itself didn't become enough of a way to help me cope. And so as much as it had kind of helped in the sense of being a way of coping, not a very constructive way of coping, I did get to the point whereby I needed to do more. And for me, the self-harming was a very active thing, and something that kind of did something. It was a lot more of an action for me than the anorexia was, and so I very much began to attach my self-injury to my eating disorder, and in a very negative way. It very much became, if I ate, or if I was feeling bad, or I was feeling fat, or any of those things, I kind of placed that again onto my body in a different way by self-harming. And for me, my worst points of self-harming have been when my anorexia has been at its worst as well. And so I kind of ended up trapped in this cycle of just trying to find ways of coping. And that kind of became progressively worse for me. The anorexia became worse, the depression became worse, the self-injury became worse, the anxiety became worse. I didn't leave the house, I didn't leave my room, and it all kind of just cycled and cycled and cycled to a point where literally a massive crisis exploded. In terms of my recovery from self-injury, it came at the same time as my recovery from my eating disorder. I think it can be almost impossible. Yeah, I think it's impossible to try to recover from something and not deal with all the other destructive ways of coping. Okay, there's degrees of coping. I mean, somebody might have a drug problem and that's their primary diagnosis, and they also have an eating disorder, but it isn't as significant. But in the end of the day, when you're not dealing with the eating disorder, either, no matter how big or small it is, it's going to be possibly the thing that you then hold on to, which then cycles you back into it, because they're all connected. And yes, they're all different ways of coping, but they are all that. They are ways of coping, and they're negative ways of coping. And so my advice in terms of trying to deal with this isn't to say, right, I'm just going to focus on my food and then, self-harm, because that isn't healing, that isn't trying to get yourself better. I think that there can be a point whereby maybe, yes, if you have been trying to deal with your eating disorder, your self-harm possibly can increase because of that, and maybe that's just for a time span, but I think it's a really not a particularly helpful way of trying to get yourself better, or by saying, right, I'm going to stop self-harming, and then your food takes over. They need to be tackled. Both things need to be tackled. And for me, what needed to be tackled when I recovered was my depression, my self-injury, and my anorexia. And I needed to work on all of those three things, because if all I sort of did was say, right, I'm just going to focus on my food, and ignored the fact that I was continuing to self-harm, it wasn't particularly going to get me anywhere. And so for me, it had to be a rounded approach, and it had to be something I was very honest with myself about. And I do believe that you need to deal with all three. And yeah, you're going to have slips. I'm not saying that that's not going to happen. You might have a particularly difficult day when fighting your eating disorder, and you end up self-harming to help you deal with that. But you see, you know, what also might happen is that if you're dealing with the food and stuff, that it becomes so unbelievably overwhelming that you try to self-harm to kind of manage that and contain that a little bit. And you know, I think that it's reasonable to maybe expect that that's going to happen, but I certainly don't think it's something that can be ignored. And if you're finding that as you're trying to tackle recovering from your eating disorder, your self-injury is getting worse, that really needs to be looked at as well. And I wouldn't look at that in the sense of saying, okay, right, well, you know, what's causing me to self-injury? Okay, it's normally because I've eaten. Well, you know, don't make that attachment with it. Don't kind of think, right, well, because I've eaten, I'm self-harming, so I'm just going to stop eating so that I don't self-harm, because it won't work. It really, really won't work, and you'll end up self-harming for other reasons anyway. It really has to be a way of trying to recognise your vulnerabilities, recognising what triggers you, and then saying, right, okay, I'm finding that when I've eaten my dinner, I'm wanting to self-harm. What can I do to try and help me manage that? What can I do, not in terms of not eat the dinner, but other ways of managing that? Is it going to be easier if you make sure you do that when somebody's in the house with you? Is there a phone call you can make? Can you sit? I tell you what I do. I sit on my computer on Skype or on MSN and eat my dinner, and then I've got contact with somebody as well while I'm there. So I think that you need to try and think of ways and means of managing recovering from the eating disorder and recognising your vulnerabilities for self-harm. I guess the other problem can be is with self-harming is for it to be a way of making yourself real and making yourself feel alive and making yourself feel like you are actually here. And what you might find when you begin to deal with the eating disorder is you actually start to feel, and having felt completely numb and then self-harming to try and feel, you then find yourself self-harming because everything feels so overwhelming. And again, you know, you need to look at your vulnerabilities, and in the same way that you're tackling your eating disorder in terms of trying to find safer ways to eat, you know, if, you know, I'm here with my friend at the moment and she's finding it easier to eat while I'm here with her, and I'm not saying that that's something I can always do or something that's going to ideally happen, but it's really taking advantage of the situations where you are being supported, and, you know, really just trying to keep yourself safe and recognising when you're not feeling safe, and actually almost having a list of the things that you can do. And I mean, you know, I used to do all sorts of things to help me distract, and you know, I was lucky because I did have my family around me, and I was able to say, look, do you know what, Mum, I'm really struggling, I really want to self-harm now that I've eaten, you know. And you know, other triggers can be things like if you're being weighed at the hospital, at your doctor's. I was weighed by my mother, you know, and those things triggering you, but you know, try and find words for those things right here, right, ask us questions, write an email to any one of us here. We've all said that we're willing to take that, and just try to, recognise vulnerabilities, and that's my main advice really, recognise triggers and deal with both. You can't deal with one and not the other, because it'll end up just all coming back down. You can't neglect other negative coping mechanisms. There's no point in you trying to fucking eat and gain weight when all you're then going to do is self-harm each time. You know, that to me isn't productive, and that to me isn't recovery. Even if you're doing better with your food, you know, you need to be dealing with those feelings afterwards, and you need to not be hurting yourself. I'm going to cut this now because my time's running out. But as I've said, I might try and explore this a little bit more. It's something that I've wanted for the channel, so I might even do this again next week, or wait for some more responses. Alright guys, take care of yourselves, bye.